Tied to the fence, the desert wind slammed against the ranch house like a fist, rattling the shutters and sending a murmuring howl across the empty land. But the moment Elias Brody stepped onto his porch, the wind stopped so abruptly it felt unnatural, as if the whole desert had frozen to watch what he was about to see. That was when he noticed her, a woman tied to his fence. At first, Elias thought the shape leaning against the split-rail timber was some unlucky drifter who'd collapsed from heat or hunger. But as he moved closer, his boots crunching over frost-hardened dirt, the truth hit him sharp and cold. It wasn't a drifter. And she wasn't leaning. She was bound, wrists pulled tight by rawhide straps, shoulders trembling under the beating sun, hair tangled and blowing like a black banner in the dry wind. She looked like she'd been there through the night, half frozen, half fevered. All defiant, her head lifted the moment his shadow touched her boots, her eyes dark as obsidian, and just as sharp locked on him. She didn't blink, didn't flinch, didn't look away. "I said," she rasped, voice scraped raw from thirst and dust. "Do whatever you want." "Apache, man." The words hit Elias like a thrown blade. He stopped a few feet from her, hands raised slightly to show he wasn't a threat, though he could feel the unease slithering along his spine. "I ain't Apache," he said quietly. The woman frowned, confusion flickering across her bruised face. Her gaze traveled over him, his dusted coat, the restitched hat brim, the scar slicing through his right eyebrow, the way he stood like a man who'd survived more than he ever talked about. "You're not one of them," she murmured, less a question than a dawning realization. "With who?" Elias asked. She opened her mouth to answer, but her knees buckled. Elias lurched forward instinctively, catching her before she slumped into the dirt. She was burning with fever. Sweat clung to her temples despite the chill. Her breath hitched, shallow and ragged. "Easy," he muttered, cutting the rawhide from her wrists with his pocket knife. "I got you." "You shouldn't," she whispered faintly. "They'll kill you too." But consciousness slipped from her before she could say more. Elias carried her inside, pushing the door shut with his boot. His home was small, only 2 rooms and a loft, but it was warm, lit by the orange glow of a fire he'd banked through the night. He laid her on the Navajo rug near the hearth, then hurried to the basin for water. Only when he pushed her sleeve back to wash the dust from her arm did he see it. A brand, fresh, swollen, still angry, red around the edges. Not a cattle brand, not any rancher's mark. It was a jagged letter R intersecting a crooked V. Elias swallowed hard. He'd only seen that mark once before, burned into a dead man's back. The Red Vale Riders, a gang the law never touched, not because they were elusive, but because the law was scared of them. They trafficked people. They burned homesteads for sport. They stole livestock, silver, land, anything and any soul who got in their way. Disappeared like smoke. Elias gritted his teeth and dipped a cloth into cool water. The woman groaned softly as he dabbed at her wounds, her eyelids fluttering. When her eyes finally opened fully, she stared at the ceiling for a long moment, as if trying to remember where she was. Then she turned her head just enough to see him. "You didn't leave me outside," she said hoarsely. "Didn't seem right to." Elias replied. She scanned his face again, searching for cruelty or advantage or even fear, but found none. Slowly, she pushed herself up on one elbow. "My name is Tessa Nantan," she said. Her voice was steadier now, though it still carried grit. "And you just stepped between me and the Red Vale Riders." "I ain't on their good side anyway," Elias replied lightly. "Doubt I'll notice the difference." Tessa's mouth twitched in something that looked almost like a bittersweet smile, then faded. "They tied me to your fence for a reason," she said. "Not just to get me out of their way." Elias lowered his cup. "What reason?" "To make you look guilty. They knew someone would find me eventually. Probably the sheriff. And if I'm tied to your fence, with their mark on me, it'll look like you stole me. Or, worse. Elias stiffened. Sheriff knows better than that. Tessa lowered her gaze. Does he? The riders pay him well. He'll look the other way if it benefits him. He has before. Elias' jaw tightened as her words sank in, but before he could reply, Tessa leaned forward, expression sharp. You need to know why they took me, she said. Why they branded me. Why they won't stop until I'm dead. He didn't ask if she was sure. He could see the fear in her eyes, yes, but layered beneath it was something fiercer. Something like resolve. Tell me, he said quietly. Tessa inhaled slowly, bracing herself. I saw something, she said. Something I wasn't supposed to see. The riders rode to the Harlow homestead 3 nights ago. Elias stiffened. The Harlows were good, gentle people. A mother, father, and 2 small boys who kept mostly to themselves. What did they do? He asked, though dread sank into him like a stone. Tessa's throat bobbed. I saw them slaughter the whole family. Elias shut his eyes briefly. Pain lanced through his chest. He'd shared a drink with John Harlow not a month ago. Watched the man's boys race each other on makeshift wooden horses. They did it because the Harlows refused to sell their land. Tessa continued. And because there's something the riders want hidden there, something buried deep. What? Elias whispered. A map, she said. One their grandfather made. A map to a lost Apache silver vein hidden in the mountains, a place no white man has stepped foot. A vein so rich it would make kings out of murderers. Elias stared at her. He'd heard rumors, old legends whispered around campfires, but he always assumed they were just stories. The writers think I know where the map is, Tessa said. But I don't, not for certain. I only know where it might be. And that knowledge alone was enough for them to brand me. She lifted her bandaged arm, eyes blazing. They want to sell me first, then kill me later. Elias set his jaw. They ain't getting you back. A tremor moved through her, not of fear, but of something like relief. But before either of them could say more, a faint sound curled through the window. At first Elias thought it was the wind again. But then he heard the rhythm. Hoofbeats. Many of them. Tessa sat bolt upright, her breath catching hard. They found us. Elias moved quickly, grabbing his Winchester from the mantel and tossing Tessa a blanket to cover her shoulders. As he peeked through the side window, his heart dropped into his stomach. 7 riders. Lanterns swinging. Guns strapped across their saddles. The Red Vale Riders. The lead rider's torch flickered. Illuminating a scarred face Elias recognized with an immediate surge of hatred. Brig. They'll burn your home. Kill you without hesitation. Let 'em try, Elias murmured, his voice low and uncheckable. She swallowed. You don't understand. If they take me, they won't. As the riders approached the main yard, Elias placed a hand gently but firmly on Tessa's shoulder. Stay behind the table. If things go wrong, you run through the back and take my mare south toward the ravine. I won't leave you, she whispered fiercely. You might have to. Lantern lights splashed against the windows. Hoofbeats slowed. The riders had arrived. Elias tightened his grip on the rifle, glanced once at Tessa, her eyes burning with fear and determination, and stepped onto the porch. The wind had returned now, howling like something alive. Brig Cullen grinned through yellow teeth as he tugged his horse to a halt. Evenin'. Brody, he called. We're here for what's ours. Elias leveled the rifle. Not tonight you ain't. Brig raised his brow. You really think you can protect her? Elias' finger curled around the trigger. I don't think, he said. I know. A crack split the night. Gunfire exploded. And the war for Tessa Nantan began. The siege at Brody Ranch gunfire ripped open the night like tearing metal. Elias fired first not at Brig, but at the lantern dangling from the nearest rider's hand. The shot struck true, shattering the glass. Flames burst upward in a startled bloom, spooking 3 horses at once. The yard erupted in chaos. Riders cursed, horses bucked, and Elias used the split-second confusion to dive behind the water trough. Bullets sliced through the wooden planks around him. Inside the cabin, Tessa ducked as a bullet punched a hole clean through the doorframe. "Elias!" she shouted. "Stay down." He roared back, but Brig Cullen recovered fast. He dismounted with a heavy thud, pulling his revolver in a slow, deliberate draw that sent a chill down the back of anyone watching. "Brody!" Brig called, voice echoing across the yard. "We didn't come for you. We came for her. Hand the woman over, and we ride away peaceful." Elias fired a round that sparked off Brig's boot spur. "That peaceful enough for you?" Elias shouted. Brig snarled, an ugly twist of lips Elias had seen only once before, back when Brig had pistol-whipped a farmhand for refusing to share his water. "All right," Brig spat. "Have it your way." He raised his arm. "Burn it." 2 riders tossed torches toward the cabin. Tessa gasped as flames crawled across the porch. The heat surged inward almost instantly. Smoke clawed at her throat. She glanced toward the back exit Elias had told her to take if things went wrong. But things hadn't gone wrong. Things were turning disastrous. She rose to her feet, ignoring the dizziness that tried to push her back down. Elias would die if she left. She knew it with a certainty as sharp as the memory of the brand on her arm. Not again, she thought fiercely. Not another good person dying because of her. She grabbed Elias's spare rifle from the wall. Outside, Elias heard the crack of the cabin door flying open. "Tessa." "Stay. Too late." She stepped onto the porch, rifle braced. Eyes burning with fury and heat reflection. She fired. Ryder fell sideways off his horse. Elias cursed under his breath. "Get back inside." "No," she said, voice steady. "This started because of me. It won't end with you dead on my account." Brig's eyes narrowed as he spotted her through the smoke. "Well, ain't that poetic?" he drawled. "The little Apache rat thinks she can shoot." Tessa fired again, this time grazing Brig's arm. His expression changed from smugness to murder. "Kill her," he bellowed. 2 riders charged. Elias fired rapid shots, felling the first. The second pulled his pistol, but a sudden howl of wind blasted through the yard, scattering sand and ash. It forced him to shield his eyes for a moment too long. Tessa took that moment. Her shot caught him in the shoulder, spinning him backward. Brig cursed again. "You idiots can't even handle 2 people." He fired at Tessa. Elias lunged, grabbing her by the waist and yanking her behind the water trough. The bullet embedded itself in the cabin wall behind them. "You all right?" he asked, breath hard. Tessa swallowed. "I'm fine." Steam rose off the burning porch. Smoke thickened, but the riders were regrouping. Fresh torches appeared in their hands. Elias's ranch would be ashes in minutes. They couldn't keep fighting here. "Tessa," he said quietly, "we're leaving." She blinked. "Where?" "To the ravine." "No horses, they'll hear 'em. We slip out the back and take the arroyo path." "And the riders?" "We'll lose them in the rocks if we're fast." A bullet cracked against the trough, spraying splinters over them. Tessa nodded. They crawled along the dirt, keeping low as the riders' attention remained on the front of the cabin. Flames licked across the porch, climbing the posts. Elias's heart tightened at the sight. Years of work, memories, letters from his brother, his mother's rocking chair, everything burning. But he didn't stop. He couldn't. Not when the woman beside him would die if he hesitated. They reached the back pasture fence. Elias boosted Tessa over, then climbed after her. They ran across open ground, boots pounding, chests burning. Behind them, Briggs suddenly shouted, "They're running!" "After 'em!" Torches flared. Hooves thundered. Tessa's lungs screamed as they sprinted toward the dry riverbed. Elias grabbed her hand, pulling her along with sheer will. "Down here!" He gasped as they reached a washed-out ravine. They slid down the sloped earth, dirt and rocks tumbling with them. Above, riders stormed past, missing the ravine entirely at first, but Briggs wasn't a fool. A moment later he returned, stopping at the edge of the drop-off. His smile was pure venom. "Found you." Tessa clutched Elias's arm. They were trapped in the ravine with nowhere to climb. The walls were sheer, the sand too loose. Briggs raised his pistol. "It's been fun." "Brody, really." Elias shoved Tessa down and rolled over her. Bracing for the shot, a sound cut the air. Sharp whistle, followed by a distant series of whoops echoing across the plain. Briggs froze. His men stiffened. Elias's heart jumped. Tessa whispered, "No." "No, they wouldn't." Hoofbeats appeared on the horizon, silhouettes forming under the moon. Riders fast, silent, and disciplined. Not the Red Vale Riders, something else entirely. Briggs' face drained of color. "Apache," he hissed. Indeed, Apache warriors were riding toward them. 5, maybe 6, bows drawn, rifles glinting. Tessa's breath shuddered. "They're from my mother's band," she whispered. "They must have seen the fire." Briggs backed his horse away from the ravine edge, panicked. "We'll settle this later, Brody," he shouted, kicking into a gallop. His men followed, scattering into the darkness. The Apache riders didn't pursue. They reined in above the ridge, watching, silent as carved stone. Elias slowly released the breath he'd been holding. Tessa didn't move. She stared at the warriors with something like shock, something like fear, something like hope. One rider dismounted and walked to the edge of the ravine. His face was painted with black streaks, his braids tied with red cloth. He studied Tessa for a long moment. Then he spoke in Apache. Tessa's lips parted in disbelief. "What's he saying?" Elias whispered. Tessa turned to him, eyes wide. He said, "You saved me, and—" "My mother sent them to bring me home." Elias blinked. "Home?" Tessa swallowed. "I haven't been home in 3 years." The warrior extended a hand, offering help to climb up. Tessa looked at Elias, uncertain. "Torn. If you need to go," Elias murmured softly, "I won't stop you." Tessa shook her head. "They'll kill you without me. They think you're part of this now." Elias frowned. "I am part of this. Doesn't mean you owe me." "It's not about owing," she said, voice firm. "It's about finishing what the riders started. And you can't do that alone." Their eyes held for a moment, both bruised by the night's violence, both bound now by something neither knew how to name. Finally, Tessa turned back to the warrior. "Tell my mother," she said in Apache, "I will return when I can. But I have work yet to finish." The warrior listened, then nodded solemnly. He clasped Tessa's forearm once, a mark of respect, then mounted his horse. Without another word, the group rode off, disappearing into the desert like smoke. The night suddenly felt enormous again. Elias exhaled. "Well," he muttered, "that could have gone worse." Tessa managed a weak smile. "Could have gone better, too." They sat in the moonlit ravine, breathing hard, dust settling around them. Elias finally looked at her, really looked. "You all right?" he asked softly. Tessa nodded slowly. "I will be." "And your mother?" he asked. Tessa hesitated, something painful flickering across her face. "She thinks I left because I was ashamed. I left because I wanted to protect her. From the riders. From Kane Mercer. And from what I learned." Elias waited. Tessa's voice dropped to a whisper. John Harlow wasn't the only one murdered, Mrs. Harlow. She told me something before she died. Something I didn't tell the Riders. Something I haven't told anyone." Elias leaned in. "What is it?" Tessa stared at the stars as if searching for courage. "Kane Mercer isn't just after the map. He's after a secret buried with John Harlow. Something worth more than silver. Something that could change everything in the territory." Elias's heartbeat quickened. "What kind of secret?" Tessa finally looked at him, her eyes dark and steady. "The kind men kill entire families for," she whispered. "And the kind we need to find before Kane does." The wind shifted, carrying the smell of smoke from the burning ruin of Brody Ranch behind them. In the ravine's quiet, Elias tightened his jaw. "Then we track the Harlow homestead at dawn," he said. Tessa nodded. "And we pray we're not already too late." The smoke was thin at first, just a gray smear rising past the treetops. Yet Elias felt it like a warning pressed cold against the back of his neck. "Elias," Tessa murmured, her voice tight. "That's coming from your ranch." His heart plunged. The boys. The horses. Everything. He jammed his heels into Shadow's sides, and the stallion leapt forward. Tessa pushed her paint mare alongside him, both riders streaking across the frost-laced valley. The wind cut sharp against their faces, carrying the faint metallic tang of fear that neither acknowledged aloud. They rode like the world behind them was collapsing, and maybe it was. Halfway home, the wind shifted. A new smell reached them: burned pine. Charred hay. Something ruined. Tessa's jaw locked. "They're sending a message." "Not to me," Elias said grimly. "To you." The smoke thickened as they neared the ridge that overlooked his ranch. Elias slowed, raising a hand. "Hold up. Could be an ambush." They slid off their horses and crawled through sagebrush until the ranch came into full view. Elias felt physically sick. The barn was half collapsed, flames licking the blackened beams like hungry tongues. The corral fence was scorched and curling, and the yard was trampled by unfamiliar boots. 3 horses, branded with the Red Vale insignia, were tied to his front porch. And there, lounging against Elias's porch post like a man at Sunday rest, sat Brig Cullen. He was laughing an easy, ugly laugh while flicking ash from a cigarette. Another rider poked at the smoldering remains of the barn with a mangled rake, as if checking for anything still alive to kill. Tessa whispered, "Brig." Elias's fists tightened so hard his knuckles cracked. "That bastard burned my barn." "Don't do anything yet," she murmured. More of them. Kane Mercer stepped into view. He moved like someone who believed the earth belonged under his boots, a man untouched by law, by fear, by restraint. His pale hair glowed strangely in the orange reflection of the fire. He held his revolver loose in one hand, swinging it casually, as if it had already done enough damage for the morning. The way he walked chilled Elias more than the flames. Elias whispered, "They're here for you, Tessa. They'll burn the whole valley to reclaim what they think is theirs," she replied bitterly. She stared at the destruction, eyes heavy with guilt. "This is because of me." "No," Elias said, voice low but firm. "This is on them." They watched silently as Kane barked something at his riders. Elias couldn't hear, but Tessa cocked her head and listened. "He thinks you'll come back," she translated quietly. "He says he'll wait an hour, then ride north to the canyon camp." Elias stiffened. "North? The canyon?" She nodded slowly. Something dark crossed her face, the kind of pain a person locks behind their ribs until it threatens to break them. "I know that place," she said. "That's where they keep what they steal." "And where they keep those they capture. You were held there?" "Yes, and my brother." Elias stared at her. He hadn't known. "You never told me. I wasn't ready." Her voice cracked. "Nowlin. They took him when I wouldn't give them what they wanted. I thought he'd escaped. But if Kane is heading there, Nantan may still be alive and trapped. Elias looked at the riders below. There were 4 of them, not many, but enough to kill. Enough to destroy everything he had left. We need to get them away from the porch, he said. I have a way, Tessa replied, eyes sharp. She pointed toward the west ridge. The irrigation gate. If you open it, the river floods the gully behind your house. Loud, violent, like a landslide. And they'll think someone's coming, Elias said, or that nature is. Chaos would break their formation. Spook the horses. Create an opening. They circled west and reached the old irrigation gate, a rusted beast his father had built decades ago. Elias gripped the wheel. It groaned loudly, resisting him. Harder, Tessa urged. He used everything he had. The gate jerked, screeched. Then finally, violently, it gave way. A surge of frigid river water roared through the channel like a stampede. It tore along the gully, smashing branches, dislodging rocks, shaking the ground beneath them. Tessa yanked him behind a slab of stone. Down! The roaring grew louder as the torrent thundered behind the ranch. Shouts rose instantly. Horses screamed. A rider cursed loudly. Brigg began yelling orders. And Kane snapped something sharp and angry. It worked, Tessa said. Let's go, Elias answered. They sprinted downhill, using the smoke and confusion as cover. A rider near the corral turned too late as Elias slammed into him. They grappled, fists flying. Brigg charged next, knife raised. Elias caught Brigg's wrist, but the blade still sliced along his ribs. He winced, then Brigg's knife flew from his hand. Tessa had thrown a river stone straight at Brigg's knuckles. Brigg howled. Elias's fist struck his jaw, dropping him. Another rider lunged for Tessa, grabbing her wrist. She twisted, slammed her knee into his arm bone, cracked, and finished him with a strike to the temple. Elias stared at her in brief awe. You're something fierce. Before she could reply, Kane stepped into the yard, leveling his revolver at Elias. Move, he told Tessa, and he dies first. Tessa didn't budge. Shoot me then, she said coldly. Kane's lips curled. I'll shoot you both. His finger tightened. A sharp whistle cut through the air. A single arrow whirled from the tree line and ripped Kane's hat clean off his head. Kane staggered. Stunned, not injured, but furious. Elias turned to see who had fired. A slim figure stepped from behind a cottonwood tree. Long black hair, bow in hand, quiver strapped across his back. Tessa gasped. Nantan. Her brother. Alive. Another rider shouted, Boss! There's more of them. Kane's expression snapped from shock to fury. He pulled another rider by the collar and sprinted toward the horses. Nantan loosed another arrow, grazing Kane's coat, but Kane mounted and kicked the horse hard. Canyon camp. Kane bellowed. Now. They thundered north. Brigg groaned on the dirt. Elias gave him a final punch, knocking him out cold. The yard went silent except for the groan of collapsing beams. Tessa ran to Nantan, colliding with him in a desperate embrace. I thought you were dead, she whispered. I thought the same, he murmured against her hair. Elias let them have their moment, though his chest ached at the sight of his ruined ranch. Tessa joined him quietly, her face soft with guilt. I'm sorry, she said. You didn't do this. Kane did. Nantan approached, voice steady. He won't stop. He's scared now of what Tessa knows. Of what we know. Elias turned to look at him. And what is that? Tessa swallowed. The riders aren't just raiding ranches. They're smuggling army weapons, Nantan said. Through the canyon. Kane is planning something big. Elias stiffened. What kind of big? Tessa met his eyes. A war. Nantan nodded. And Kane is riding to protect the stash. Elias looked at the ruined barn. then north. Then tonight, he said, voice steady and cold. We ride after him. Tessa tightened her grip on her brother's arm. This ends in the canyon. Elias nodded once. Tessa added softly, but not all of us may return. Night settled over the canyon like a lid on a boiling pot, thick, heavy, and waiting to erupt. Elias, Tessa, and Nantan dismounted and tied their horses behind a jutting outcrop of stone. The canyon stretched before them in a jagged maze of shadows. A single torch flickered far inside, marking the entrance to Kane's hidden camp. Nantan crouched low, studying the tracks in the dust. 4 horses, he whispered. Kane, 2 riders. And Brig. Elias frowned. Brig should still be unconscious. Tessa shook her head. Brig has survived rattler bites and winter fevers. He'll survive a knock to the jaw. They moved forward in silence. The canyon swallowed the sound of their footsteps, replacing it with the faint, eerie drip of water from distant cracks. The air was cold, carrying the mineral scent of limestone and old secrets. Tessa brushed her fingers lightly against the rock walls, almost unconsciously. I spent weeks trapped here once, she murmured. I memorized every twist, every hiding place, every echo. Elias touched her shoulder gently. Then lead us. She nodded, inhaled, and stepped deeper into the dark. They kept low, weaving around blind corners. Twice, they heard Kane's voice echoing off the walls, a low, furious growl as he barked orders at his men. Each time, they froze, waited for the canyon to fall silent again, and crept on. The deeper they went, the colder the air grew. It's close, Tessa whispered as they approached a bend. Their main supply chamber is just ahead. Elias rested his hand over his holster. You sure we'll find what we need? She nodded. John Harlow died protecting it. Mrs. Harlow tried to warn me. And Kane killed them both to take control. Nantan's jaw tightened. Then tonight the riders fall. They stepped around the bend and froze. The canyon opened into a wide, cavernous ceiling, high and jagged like the ribs of some ancient beast. Lanterns cast an amber glow across wooden crates stacked ceiling high, stamped with the U.S. Army emblem. Elias swallowed. My God. Rifles. Powder barrels. Ammunition. Enough to equip a regiment. Tessa's voice shook. This is why Kane wanted the map. John Harlow used his homestead to hide transport routes. Mrs. Harlow discovered it. And Kane couldn't risk anyone knowing. John didn't die in a robbery, Elias said quietly. He was executed. Tessa nodded grimly. And Kane planned to sell all of this to outlaw bands across the border. Nantan's eyes narrowed. Or start a war between settlers and tribes. Either way, Kane profits. A voice echoed from above. That's right. Kane Mercer stood on a ledge carved into the cavern wall, revolver in hand. Brig Cullen appeared beside him, head wrapped in a blood-crusted bandage, eyes filled with venom. Kane smiled down at them. And now that you've seen it, none of you leave alive. Elias reacted, first shoving Tessa behind a crate as Kane fired. The bullet struck the wood with a dull thud. Splinters rained over their heads. Nantan rolled to cover behind a powder barrel, stringing an arrow with lightning speed. Brig fired at him, but Nantan ducked and released. The arrow struck Brig's shoulder, knocking him back against the wall. Elias popped up long enough to shoot toward Kane, but Kane vanished behind a pillar of stone, split. Elias whispered. They moved like shadows, weaving between crates as bullets cracked overhead. Tessa pressed her back to a crate and scanned for movement. She saw Kane's silhouette creeping along the upper ridge, circling to flank them. She grabbed Elias's sleeve as he passed. He's trying to get above us. Elias nodded. Nantan fired another arrow to keep Brig occupied. Brig cursed, scrambling down the ledge, clutching his shoulder. Elias and Tessa raced along the bottom of the cavern, searching for the access ramp that led to Kane's perch. They reached a narrow twisting passage that climbed upward in a steep arc. Elias touched Tessa's hand. "Stay behind me." "No," she said quietly. "We do this together." The ramp was narrow, barely enough space to walk side by side. Their footsteps echoed up the walls, bouncing ahead of them like ghostly drumbeats. Halfway up, a gunshot exploded. The bullet sparked off a stone inches from Tessa's head. Kane emerged from behind a rock spire. Aiming again, Tessa dropped low while Elias fired, driving Kane into cover. Suddenly, Brig barreled around the corner behind them. "Thought you killed me," he snarled. He grabbed Tessa's braid and yanked her backward. She stumbled, slamming into the rock wall. Elias spun, but Brig had already drawn a knife and held it to Tessa's throat. "You shoot," Brig hissed, "and she bleeds." Tessa clenched her jaw. "Do it," she whispered. "Don't let him win." Brig pressed the blade harder. Elias froze. A whistle sliced the air. An arrow plunged into Brig's ribs. He staggered, stunned, eyes wide. "Nallan!" Brig gasped. The knife slipped from his fingers. Tessa shoved him hard. Brig tumbled backward over the ramp's edge and fell into the cavern below with a sickening thud. Tessa single quotes S chest heaved. Elias grabbed her, pulling her close for one trembling second. But the moment shattered as Kane shouted from above, "Enough!" He stepped onto the ramp, revolver aimed dead at Elias. "You're strong, Brody," Kane sneered. "But you came here alone." "No," Tessa said quietly from Elias's side. He didn't. Nallan emerged from behind a boulder above Kane, silent, swift, and unseen. Kane fired upward. The bullet grazed Nallan's arm but didn't stop him. Tessa lunged low. Elias surged forward. Kane fired again, wild and panicked. The shot tore into Elias's shoulder. He staggered back in pain. Tessa screamed his name as Kane leveled the gun for a finishing shot. But Nallan's final arrow came first. It struck Kane square in the chest. Kane stumbled, breath gurgling, revolver slipping from his fingers. He fell to his knees, stunned, staring at the blood on his coat as if it offended him. "You don't know what this will start," he gasped. Tessa stepped forward, face stone hard. "No, you don't know what you ended." Kane crumpled to the ground and went still. Silence filled the cavern, the kind that feels like the earth itself exhaling. Elias leaned against the wall, wincing as Tessa rushed to him. "You're hit," she whispered, hand trembling. "It's clean," he said through clenched teeth. "Just burns." Nallan retrieved his arrows, grimacing at his own wound. "We need to collapse the cavern," he said. "Destroy everything Kane stored." Tessa nodded. "If other riders come back, they must find nothing." They worked quickly. Elias and Nallan stacked powder barrels at the cavern entrance while Tessa gathered torn canvas, loose crates, anything that would burn fast. They lit a fuse with a lantern wick and sprinted out of the canyon mouth. They dove behind a rock outcropping just as the explosion tore through the cheese with a lantern wick and sprinted out of the canyon mouth. They dove behind a rock outcropping just as the explosion tore through the cheese with a lantern wick and sprinted out of the canyon mouth. They dove behind a rock outcropping just as the explosion tore through the night. Fire roared outward. The ground trembled. The canyon wall shook violently. A wave of hot air blasted across their backs. Sparks rained down like stars torn apart. When the rumbling ceased, the cavern entrance was a mound of collapsed stone. Every stolen rifle, every bullet, every weapon meant to start a war was buried forever. Elias exhaled shakily. "Hell of a fireworks show." Tessa laughed, tired, breathless, relieved. They returned to the ranch ruins at dawn. Smoke drifted gently from the barn's remains. The land looked wounded but not defeated. Elias stood staring at it, hands on his hips. Tessa stood beside him. "I'm sorry," she whispered again. "Stop apologizing," Elias said softly. "You saved me. You saved this whole territory." Nalin offered his hand. Elias shook it firmly. "You fought well, Brody," Nalin said. "My people will know your name." "And yours," Elias replied. Nalin smiled once. "I'll return to my mother. She wants to know what Tessa has done." He embraced his sister long and tight. "Jin," he said in Apache. "Be strong." "You too," she whispered back. Then he rode away into the rising sun dot when he was gone. Tessa turned to Elias. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. Elias looked at his burned barn and battered yard. Then he looked at her, at the woman who had survived captivity, betrayal, and war, who had stood beside him through fire and gunpowder, who now carried no fear in her eyes, only possibility. "Now?" he said, voice gentler than she'd ever heard it. "Now we rebuild. If you want to stay." Tessa stepped closer, brushing ash from his sleeve. "I do," she whispered. Elias took her hand. The sun rose warm behind them, lighting the valley in gold. The past was buried. The riders were broken. John and Mrs. Harlow had justice. And the canyon, once a prison, was now sealed forever. Elias and Tessa stood among the ruins. Not alone, not afraid. Just beginning.